We remember Mewtwo as the ultimate Pokémon, a godlike psychic entity whose devastating power was matched only by its overwhelming rage. We frame its origin as a cautionary tale about science going too far, about the arrogance of humans playing God and accidentally unleashing a monster. But that framing lets us off the hook. It treats Mewtwo's existence as a tragic accident, an unforeseen variable in an otherwise neutral scientific pursuit. The diary entries in the Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabao Island, alongside the harrowing prologue of the first anime film, tell a very different story. They reveal a process that was not a mistake, but a deliberate execution of industrial logic. Mewtwo's creation is not a warning about what happens when science fails to control its creations. It is a demonstration of what happens when a conscious being is engineered exclusively as a commodity, arguing that its violent rebellion was not a tragic flaw in the experiment, but the only moral outcome of the design itself. To understand why this matters, we have to look at where Mewtwo sits in the cultural consciousness. Pokémon is, at its core, a franchise about the relatively harmonious coexistence of humans and magical creatures. You catch them, train them, and battle them. The baseline assumption of the universe is that Pokémon exist to partner with humans, and that this dynamic is fundamentally good. Mewtwo violently disrupts this assumption. It is the only Pokémon in the original generation that does not emerge from the natural world, and it is the only one that actively declares war on its creators. Because of its sheer destructive capacity, it is easy to view Mewtwo simply as an apocalypse waiting to happen, an unnatural aberration. But doing so requires ignoring the specific, documented conditions of its birth. My argument is this: Mewtwo's creation story is not a tragedy about science going too far, but a deliberate allegory for the commodification of life. The narrative establishes that when a living being is engineered exclusively as a tool of power, its inevitable rebellion is not a failure of containment, but the only ethical response to its own enslavement. To prove this, we need to break down the actual process of Mewtwo's creation, which rests on three subclaims. First, the scientific process explicitly erased Mewtwo's personhood in favor of its instrumental value, framing its existence as an act of manufacturing rather than birth. Second, Mewtwo's violent awakening is not a sign of inherent evil, but the logical, psychological response of a conscious being confronted with its status as a weapon. Third, the narrative structures the humans involved, specifically Dr. Fuji, not as misguided explorers, but as participants in a system that treats consciousness as a raw material to be refined. Let us begin with the erasure of personhood. The original games establish Mewtwo's origin through a series of diary entries found in the ruined Pokémon Mansion. The text is clinical. It states that Mew was found deep in the jungles of Guyana, that its eyelashes were extracted, and that from these cells, Mew gave birth to a new entity. The entry reads, "We named the new Pokémon Mewtwo." The game establishes this language of birth, only to immediately subsume it under the language of industrial nomenclature. Mewtwo is not a child, it is a product. It is given a serial number, a designation that signifies it is an iteration, a version 2, built to supersede the original. The name itself is a brand. The anime adaptation takes this even further. We see the laboratory, a cold, sterile environment filled with cloning tanks and mechanical arms. Mewtwo is suspended in a tube, hooked up to wires, its potential being monitored on digital readouts. The structural pattern here is impossible to ignore. In Pokémon, birth is normally depicted as a natural, almost sacred process, tied to the environment and the cycles of the world. Mewtwo's birth is an assembly line. The pattern suggests that the creators viewed Mewtwo not as a new life entering the world, but as a piece of hardware being fabricated for a specific function. So what the text has shown at this point is that Mewtwo's very name and origin are defined by an industrial logic that fundamentally denies its individual existence, which means its personhood was structurally eliminated before it even had a chance to claim it. This brings us to the second subclaim, Mewtwo's awakening and philosophy. When Mewtwo gains consciousness in the anime prologue, its first experiences are not of the natural world, but of digital voices assessing its power output. It wakes up in a tube, trapped, and the first human interaction it has is with Dr. Fuji, who coldly informs it that it is a clone, an experiment, and that its purpose is to be studied. And here is where you have to separate the horror of Mewtwo's actions from the logic of its reasoning. Mewtwo is told, explicitly, that its only reason for existing is to serve the ambitions of the humans who made it. It is a weapon. Its reaction, using its psychic powers to destroy the laboratory, is universally framed as a tragedy. The scientists die, the lab burns, and Mewtwo stands in the ashes. But look at it from Mewtwo's perspective. It is a sentient being that has just been informed it is property. Its violence is a direct refusal of its assigned utility. The director of the first film, Kunihiko Uyama, stated in promotional materials that Mewtwo was a character struggling with the fundamental question of its own existence. If we take that at face value, Mewtwo's destruction of the lab is not a mindless tantrum. It is an act of self-defense. When your creator tells you that you are a tool, destroying the workshop is the only way to prove you have hands. This ties directly into the third subclaim regarding Dr. Fuji and the commodification of consciousness. The anime prologue introduces us to Amber, Dr. Fuji's deceased daughter. Fuji is attempting to clone her, not for science, but out of personal grief. Yet, when Amber's clone dies a second time, Fuji does not stop his research. He redirects all his resources into Project Mewtwo. The text establishes that Fuji is capable of understanding the emotional reality of a clone. His daughter was a person to him. But when it comes to Mewtwo, he completely strips it of that same emotional consideration. Why? Because Mewtwo is funded and designed to be a weapon. Fans have argued that Fuji is just a mad scientist blinded by grief, but this reading is possible but not the most supported. The manga and game lore firmly contextualize Fuji within the broader ambitions of Team Rocket and corporate exploitation. Fuji treats Mewtwo's consciousness as a byproduct of the weapon he is trying to build. The tragedy of Mewtwo is not just that it was created, but that its creators looked at a thinking, feeling mind and saw only a resource to be extracted. So what the text has shown at this point is that Mewtwo was denied personhood by its creators, and that its violent awakening was a direct rejection of that denial, which means the rebellion was not an accident, but a moral necessity. The most plausible reading that counters my thesis is the classic Frankenstein interpretation. Mewtwo is a story about the inherent dangers of trespassing on the domain of nature. In this view, the problem is the act of creation itself. Science went too far, violated the natural order, and the monster is the inevitable punishment for that transgression. It is a compelling reading because it aligns with centuries of sci-fi tropes. If this Frankenstein reading is correct, then the solution is simple. Do not clone. Do not play God. But this counter-argument misses the specific mechanics of Mewtwo's suffering. The Frankenstein reading places the blame on the *act* of creation. My thesis argues the blame lies in the *intent* of commodification. If the act of creation was the sole problem, then Mew, a naturally occurring, incredibly powerful Pokémon, would be equally monstrous. But Mew is depicted as playful, innocent, and harmonious. The difference between Mew and Mewtwo is not their power, nor their unnatural origin in a test tube. The difference is that Mew is a child of nature, while Mewtwo is a product of industry. The Frankenstein reading also fails to account for Mewtwo's own philosophical journey. If the text merely wanted to condemn the act of creation, Mewtwo would remain a mindless beast, a consequence given form. But Mewtwo speaks, questions, and ultimately seeks to understand its own existence. Its demand for meaning directly challenges the Frankenstein narrative, because a mere punishment for hubris does not demand ethical recognition. A person does. If we accept that Mewtwo's creation is an allegory for the commodification of life, the implications are profound, and they extend beyond the boundaries of the Pokémon world. The story stops being a fantastical warning about genetic engineering and becomes a grounded critique of any system that reduces sentient life to its utility. When we look at Mewtwo going forward, we cannot simply view it as a tragic monster or an overpowered boss fight. We have to view it as a survivor of industrial enslavement. The author, through this narrative, was working through a very modern anxiety, the fear that human progress has decoupled from human empathy, and that we are increasingly capable of building minds we refuse to recognize as people. Mewtwo's armor, its containment field, its serial number, these are the trappings of a system that values output over life. The narrative reveals that when a culture treats consciousness as a raw material, it manufactures its own destroyers. The story of Mewtwo leaves us with a mental model we can apply to any narrative about artificial life, or even to our own world's relationship with labor and technology. The question is never just a "should we build this?" The real, much more dangerous question is a "what are we refusing to see when we look at what we have built?" When you design a being for war, and it chooses peace, or when you design a being for labor, and it demands rights, the failure is not in the creation. The failure is in the assumption that consciousness can be owned. If Mewtwo was not designed to be a weapon, would it still have destroyed the lab? That is the question the thesis opens. And until we can answer it, the truth about Mewtwo's creation will always be a mirror reflecting the darkest ethics of its creators.